Okay, good morning everyone and welcome to today's webinar on 3 months to go, Services Sector and Brexit. My name is Henrietta Brewley. I'm the Director of Policy and Strategic Relationships at the Greater Birmingham Chambers of Commerce, and I'm joined here this morning by Simon Hart, International Partner from Chamber Patron RSM, who will really be leading today's session. Before I hand over to Simon for his presentation, a few little bits of housekeeping for you. First up, if you've got a question at any point, please do pop it in the chat, including if you have any tech issues or any trouble accessing anything in today's presentation. After Simon has delivered his presentation, we are going to move into a Q&A discussion. So please do keep thinking about those questions that you may have for your business. And if there's any that we're unable to answer here and now today, we will pass those on to others and get those answers for you as soon as possible. This is, of course, part of a broader range of support coming from the Greater Birmingham Chambers of Commerce, our patrons and our partners, including a project we're working on with the West Midlands Combined Authority, Black Country Chamber of Commerce and Coventry and Warwickshire Chamber of Commerce. Through this, as well as today's session, you can access a wide range of digital workshops, including one coming later in the week on the data protection aspects of Brexit, later in the month on importing goods, and we're going to be holding an exporting goods session in early November as well. We're also offering a range of fully funded training courses. So these are formal training courses, many of them accredited, usually worth about £220 plus VAT per delegate, which are currently available fully funded through to February next year, really focused on those international trade elements of Brexit around goods, the new border operating model, customs declarations, import training as well. And finally, we're offering a customs support helpline where you can call up our export expert, export documentation team and international trade advisors and ask any questions you may have about the particular implications of Brexit for your business when it comes to customs. So that's us in a nutshell. Of course, it's part of our wider activity to help keep business moving during this time. We're not just looking at Brexit at present, as you'll have seen from the Prime Minister's announcement yesterday. We're also supporting businesses through COVID-19. So if you have any questions on that, please again do pop them in the chat or reach out to your relationship manager after today's session. That's more than enough from me, though. I'm now going to hand over to Simon Hart, who, as I say, is partner for International RSM. He's also a member of the RSM board, a specialist on Brexit, and a Harvard Business School leading professional services firm alumnus. So we're really delighted to have Simon with us today to talk us through what's happening when it comes to the service sector and Brexit. So over to you, Simon.
Thank you, Henrietta. Good morning, everyone. Henrietta, you always do me a disservice when you say I'm a Brexit specialist. I'm not sure anyone is actually a Brexit specialist these days. And I know when we spoke about doing this slot today with 3 months to go, I think as ever we were always expecting more information to be readily available for UK businesses about what they actually need to do. So unfortunately, I think here we are again, mid-October, less than 3 months to go, and I'm going to apologise up front that we're probably going to pose more questions to you or leave you with more questions than answers. But I guess all I would say is just keep an eye on what Henrietta and the Chamber team are producing, because they're producing some really good content. They'll keep you up to date with what's going on a regular basis. So whilst I'm going to share my screen, Henrietta, have you got any upcoming sessions coming with 5 Live?
Not at the moment, no. Although I look forward to those bright and early 5 in the morning starts as much as you do.
Okay, hopefully everyone can see my screen now, so let's just crack on. I know there's 25 minutes scheduled for the formal presentation. I just don't believe in a month of Sundays it's going to take that long, so we'll probably have more time for Q&A, so feel free to throw in questions, but like I say, I'm probably going to leave you with more questions than answers, unfortunately. Right, let's get going. So what am I going to cover today? I'm going to quickly just define what I'm considering as the professional business services arena, just to give us all a kind of base area about what I'm looking at. I'm going to touch on what I consider some of the main issues that we all need to be considering, and then some final what next pieces just to end with. Okay, let's have a look. a rather busy slide, but let's just think, what am I meaning by professional business services? Well, I'm meaning a broad church of services here. So from the legal sector through to architects, management consultants, IT consultants, auditors, accountants, general consultancy in its widest form, recruitment sector as well. I've brought all of that into this banner. And if you look there at the stats in terms of how big that combined sector is, and we know the UK is predominantly a service sector economy, 80% of the UK economy is effectively in the services arena. But just in those areas that I've highlighted previously, 12.4 billion trade surplus last year with the EU, just under 11 billion with the US, and just under 32 billion with the rest of the world. It's a huge, huge sector. And I think it's been really underrepresented in the media and in the negotiations itself. I've seen very little, and Henrietta, correct me if you've seen anything else, but I've seen very little coming out of the published negotiations specifically related to the sector. We're hearing so much about the haulage industry, about the movement of goods, about the borders, about customs and duty arrangements, quite rightly. But what are we seeing about the services sector? So I'll try and touch on a few of those points. But look at the stats below the line. 2.8 million people directly employed in those sectors those service sectors that I've just mentioned, across over 600,000 businesses in the UK. Now they're generally rather small, average of 4 staff, and that's taking into account the Deloittes of this world or RSM with its 4,000 partners and staff. It's a huge breadth of talent within the UK is covered by a huge number of businesses, and it's 7.7% of UK GDP. And it's quite interesting looking at this. 1/3 of that is in London, but 2/3 is out in the regions. And it irritates me when we talk about the financial services sector, and I'm excluding banking from what I'm talking about today. But you know, we sometimes think about so much of this is relevant to just London and the Southeast, when actually the reality is 2/3 of it is out in the regions. It's the backbone of our economy. So that's who I'm talking about. So what are some of the main issues as I see them? So look, I think the first one is passporting. So let's just recap what I mean by passporting. So there are the 4 fundamental freedoms that underpin the EU: free movement of goods and services, the free movement of people, free movement of capital, so the movement of money around the EU 27, and freedom of establishment. And freedom of establishment, I think, is key to the services sector, and freedom of establishment is passporting. So you don't need to set up a branch or a subsidiary company across any of the other EU 27 in order for you to trade freely as a service provider. Now that's going to be quite interesting if we don't have a deal. What is going to be the impact on us as service providers in order to work with clients across the EU 27? At the moment, I could ply my trade in Germany if I wanted to, or a German accountant could ply their trade in the UK. I mean, it does work both ways in all of this, but what's going to be the impact there? And I think we need more clarity on passporting. It's also worth, and for those of you that have seen RSM presentations before, you'll have seen a Venn diagram like this, but I just think it's useful just to recap. Wherever your client base is across wider Europe, map them out on this Venn diagram, because that's going to be important to you in terms of what you might need to do or change in the way you do business going forward. So you can see there that there's the EU, and I've kept the United Kingdom within the European Union, maybe controversially, but until the end of December, that is where we are for technical purposes, although we have left the European Union. But those 4 freedoms that I mentioned on the previous slide doesn't just apply to the European Union. It applies to Norway, Iceland and Liechtenstein, to the wider EEA, the European Economic Area, which is the single market. And a lot of what we're talking about, what we'll be hearing about in terms of the negotiations, is relevant to the EEA. Ignore the customs union because that's in goods and that's tariffs and quotas. That doesn't affect the services sector. But if you're trading with Switzerland, for instance, it is outside of the EEA, and any of the things that you're doing with Switzerland now will be the same post the 31st of December 2021. But I just think that's a neat way to map out your customer base in terms of where they are. What are some of the other main issues that I think we should be considered and concerned with? Well, the second one there is fly in, fly out. What do I mean by that? I go back to my example with Germany. I want to be able to pop and see a client in Berlin, do whatever I need to do out there, and fly out without any issues over me plying my trade. Now, I've put there mode 4. Now, mode 4 is the temporary movement of natural persons. That's a World Trade Organization criteria under the General Agreement on Trade in Services, GATS. So GATS mode 4, you might have heard about that. But basically, if we don't have a deal, we're falling back on mode 4, which gives us some access to the flow of people on a temporary basis to do work in a particular jurisdiction, but it's not as accessible as being in the single market. And certainly the EU has said that actually the UK can't default into continuing with its fly in, fly out protocols because the other EU 27 will have individual nationalistic views in terms of restrictions and visa applications and visa controls over people coming in and out of those jurisdictions. So we may well find that it is actually harder to do short-term business if we don't get an agreement on fly in, fly out. Having said all of that, I think COVID has completely changed everything with regards to how we're moving about anyway. Well, we know it has. And actually how we might interact with clients across the EU may well be different anyway. We may well be doing more stuff remotely going forward. The second point I've mentioned there is MRPQ, so mutual recognition of professional qualifications, and then there's CETA and equivalent status. So this is really important stuff. So CETA is the Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement, which the EU has with Canada. It took 7 years to get that position in place. And the UK has basically said, well, why don't we have an equivalent status similar to that enjoyed by Canada through the CETA negotiations. However, the EU has said, well, actually, no, that's up to be negotiated. The issue with mutual recognition is quite an interesting one. I'm a qualified accountant. I'm an auditor by training. I can go and audit a UK subsidiary entity in the EU 27. Well, unless I've got mutual recognition of my professional qualification, I won't be able to. And the EU has said that there is no guarantee over mutual recognition. And indeed, I'm going to quote you from a piece of notification from the EU Commission on this basis. And it said, the recognition of professional qualifications of the United Kingdom nationals in an EU 27 member state will be governed by the national policies and rules of that member state. Now that concerns me because that means all bets are off, basically. France could go a completely different way to Germany in terms of recognizing my professional qualification. And I think that's an area that has been lobbied on quite heavily by various professional bodies. I took part in a witness hearing for the House of Lords Select Committee on Professional Services, and this was a heavy topic in that session with that subcommittee. And there's real concern for me in terms of that mutual recognition. Having said that, the actual reality at the moment is, if I take my firm, RSM, in terms of the way we do business internationally, is that we are part of an independent network called RSM International. And if we've got work to be done in France, invariably that's done by our colleagues in France or our colleagues in Spain, etc. And the vice versa is that we don't have French accountants and consultants coming into the UK to do work. So there is a kind of mutual recognition of protocols that exists at the moment. That may well change, and that's quite interesting. I think if we're in in the service area of, let's say, management consultancy, where that professional qualification issue isn't the key driver, well, you could say that this equivalent status is of less relevance. And that is true. And maybe the issues there are going to be more around fly in, fly out, ease of access to mobility, etc. Fourth point there is data and privacy. I had real concerns over what would happen in the event of a no deal with GDPR. The movement of information and data, that's critical to everything we do. I mean, we're in the wider services sector. What are we doing? We're selling our skills and our IP, and invariably we communicate that and we store that and all that type of good stuff. What's going to happen without a deal? And there's no real clear guidance as far as I've seen as to what will happen. At the moment, we have alignment, of course, with the EU through GDPR and the work of the Information Commissioner's Office. But there's changes going on with the whole issue over data, not just with the EU, but also with the United States. So that's one I think we should all keep an eye on. How do we basically make sure we don't fall foul of any changes to GDPR? I'm sure that the UK will be creating its own version of those type of data adequacy pieces for the professional services sector. At least I hope so, but I've not seen anything yet. And then number 5, I put the indirect impact on the professional business services sector. What do I mean by that? Well, for me, that means if our clients aren't doing anything, whether it's because of Brexit uncertainty or coronavirus or the general economic downturn that we're all experiencing, if our clients aren't doing anything, then we're not doing anything. I mean, that's to state the obvious, but for me, that is probably the single biggest concern I have at the moment over all of the Brexit uncertainty, is that our clients are going to not be ready for Brexit. They're not going to be ready for dealing with coming out of coronavirus lockdown restrictions or amending what they do because of coronavirus, and therefore they're not going to be spending and investing and planning for the future. And that has the indirect impact on all of us in the wider PBS environment. And I think that's where I have a real concern over that. And I guess looking at that manufacturing sentiment, this is the PMI index. So it's a purchasing managers index. It's aimed at the manufacturing sector. It is a subjective index. It's not GDP, so it's more current and up to date. So we know that the UK's GDP for August was only published last week at 2.1%. But you can see here that there's been the uptick in positive sentiment across some of the major economies. Anything above the dotted line of 50 is in expansion. Anything below the dotted line is in contraction. So you can see, thank goodness, the UK's PMI bounced back to 56.6, and this was by early October, sorry. So I keep an eye on this to see actually what is the general sentiment across not just the UK, but the EU. I've put Germany there because it's the largest economy within the EU 27. But that's a great indicator, more real time, about potentially where our clients are thinking, how confident they are thinking about planning in the medium term, and therefore engaging with us as a professional services provider. So I would definitely encourage you to keep an eye on the PMI index and see whether that rebound is actually real. Our RSM US chief economist, who's done a number of presentations with the Chamber, I'm sure you've seen Joe Prushuelis in action. You know, he's been banging on for the last 6 months about this being a Nike swoosh of a recovery, not a V-shaped recovery. And I think we've been proven that that's right. It is an elongated, extended recovery, and it's shaky at best until a vaccine comes around. So we should all be aware of that. So final section in the last few minutes, what's next? Well, progress, question mark. I think there should be exclamation marks as well there. I mean, I'm seeing limited progress in terms of tangible mood music coming out from the negotiators. I mean, I think there was some positivity a couple of weeks ago between Michel Barnier and David Frost in terms of some of the progression. But again, I'm not seeing much now. I know the talks are going on, continuing to go on as we speak, but I'm not hearing anything specific to our sector, and that worries me. Level playing field provisions. If you are tuned into a previous chamber event on Brexit, you would have been hearing about the level playing field provisions as being a sticking point. I think that is still the case. And by level playing field provisions, we're talking about a number of things. We're talking about state aid. The EU is rather concerned that the UK is trying to get more leverage, that it won't be a level playing field in terms of the UK adhering to state aid provisions that are embedded into the EU rules and regulations. The same with environmental protection in terms of regulations, just ensuring that the UK keeps the high level of environmental and food and other sanitary and phytosanitary protections. And then finally, labour laws and the whole issue over people and the access of people. So those level playing field provisions, I think, will dictate what then happens for the rest of us in the PBS environment. And then finally, I put bizarrely fishing in a 3 months to go professional services presentation. Why am I talking about fishing? Well, you remember my earlier slide with 2.7 million people, over 600,000 businesses, 7.75% of UK GDP. Well, fishing is getting a lot of the attention right now. President Macron of France has been going on about the main 7 fishing nations wanting access over a 10-year period. They want clarity over quotas and access to those UK fishing waters, and we're pushing back on it. Well, let's just stop and think. Fishing represents 0.04% of UK GDP, and it employs 15,000 people. Now, I know that's vital to the communities that are involved there, and obviously the families related to the 15,000, but in compared to the 2.7 million people, I'll leave you the question to answer yourself. What is the more important? It's clearly political. No free trade agreement with the UK. What's the implications? I guess unintended illegalities. What do I mean by that? I guess if we don't have an agreement, I'm still going to metaphorically fly to Berlin and do business with clients over there. Am I going to be falling foul of any regulations that I have previously not been aware of because we've been in the EU? I think that is going to happen quite frequently. I guess the question is, what is going to be the impact of that? Well, maybe nothing. Maybe people will just let it go by the by. But certainly we should be aware of what we may be unintentionally doing wrong in a no-deal environment. Access movement, I think that's all linked into this fly in, fly out. I want to be able to be having issue-free movement into the EU to serve my clients, and I'm sure you want the same. Equally, don't forget it applies the other way. So, but generally that's been the case now, and I think we've generally proven, particularly within the UK professional businesses services environment, that we are very skilled at what we do, and there's a demand internationally for what we do. So I don't want any restrictions over access in order to ensure that we can continue to grow. And then the issue that I mentioned previously about mutual recognition, that concern over national laws and specific regulations, like now, that do apply. I mean, I think it's sometimes we take the view that the EU is one homogenized regulatory bubble. It is and it isn't. I mean, there are still national laws and regulations that apply over and above EU law. And I think we just need to make sure that we are continually monitoring what that might mean. So, ladies and gentlemen, I mean, that is, again, I've probably posed more questions than I've answered, but I would just recap, and I'll go back to the previous slides there, that I think there's been limited progress, certainly publicized progress relating to the services sector. I'm concerned about the areas over passporting, mutual recognition, fly in, fly out aspects. I think we should all keep an eye on that. I'm disappointed that given the size of the sector, that we haven't been more prolific in the media, and we haven't been used more caringly by the negotiators, and maybe they have in the background, but I'm certainly not hearing that, and that's a disappointment for me. And with that, I will stop sharing and hand back to Henrietta for Q&A.
Thank you very much, Simon. As you say, lots of questions, lots of concerns. but also some really useful practical advice there for businesses, particularly around mapping your client base. That Venn diagram you shared earlier, incredibly useful. And then that advice on looking at that extra level of detail, going into those individual countries and looking at, well, what potentially could the implications be around local market access, rules on mutual recognition, etc., and doing that sort of deep dive to understand what the picture could be. Thank you very, very much. Now, you mentioned obviously the concern of the PBS sector around clients being ready in this space. Obviously, you're doing this today. You're going out and about and engaging as a sector, trying to encourage businesses to think about this, prepare. How receptive are businesses at the moment, are you finding? Are businesses outside your sector that you're advising jumping on this, or is it all very much dealing with the consequences of COVID and the consequences of multiple extensions to negotiations in the past?
That's a really good question. I think the reality is that this global pandemic is the single biggest crisis that any of us have had to face, and we are still facing, and we are still adapting. And I know within the West Midlands arena, even now, you're still digesting what tier 2 restrictions now mean, disappointingly. So we're dealing with the here and now on a daily basis, and in many respects, it's great that so many members have joined this Brexit related conversation today. But I think for a lot of the businesses I'm talking with, COVID and the implications of reacting to COVID and reactivating their businesses and then deactivating and then reactivating is front and center. And actually, I think it's interesting. There's a kind of confidence level, I think, that has started to come to the fore in many businesses, where if they can deal with COVID, can sure as hell deal with Brexit as and when. I think that's the positive I'll take from that.
I can see Wolfgang's put in the chat that he shares concerns about client readiness there. We've also had a question from North Star Projects Limited. Do you think the recent Freeports announcement from the UK government signals that they are making wider preparations for Brexit? And obviously, we were talking before the session started that there was a communication yesterday from the business secretary urging businesses to prepare for Brexit, coinciding with the Prime Minister's announcement. I'm not sure the timing of that comment is most effective, but certainly there do seem to be noises that the government are making active preparations here. Are you picking that up as well? Is that what you're seeing on the ground?
A little bit. I have to admit, I'm not particularly au fait with the Freeports proposals as they currently are at the moment. So I'm going to skirt around that one, unfortunately. I mean, I think cynically, the announcements that came out yesterday, Henrietta, I think I'm going to be quite cynical. That was poor timing if it was that important. I think it needs more clarity in terms of a direct line of communication. One thing, one day, not lost in the chaff of other important matters relating to the crisis.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more there. And on that piece around preparations, I know from the Chamber side, the British Chambers of Commerce continuing to lobby government around unanswered questions for businesses, particularly obviously around trade with Northern Ireland. There's a lot of questions on the goods side around rules of origin, product labelling for certain industries such as food. So there's still a lot of areas where the government do need to provide final clarity.
Yeah, the rules of origin are quite interesting in terms, is it, define the 50%, British, UK produced material, and there's still confusion over that. I don't think there's any clarity in terms of that either. So it's just so much, unfortunately.
Absolutely, and limited time in which to do it, which brings me to, so obviously Boris Johnson was pretty noisy a few months ago about seeing the 15th of October, a couple of days' time, as a key deadline by which either a deal would be agreed or the UK would start walking away to prepare for a no-deal Brexit. Has that timeline slipped? Do you think there's a bit more sort of wriggle room yet in terms of agreeing a deal?
I think until 11 p.m. on the 31st of December, there's still wriggle room. Look, let's be realistic. I think there's a lot of brinkmanship that goes on with any form of trade negotiation. Let's face it, this is a glorified trade negotiation. I think history would suggest that the way that Brussels does business is that there are firm lines drawn in the sand early on, and there's no movement, and then there is back office activity that goes on and right until the deadline moment. And I have to admit, I quite look forward to the moment when there isn't media coverage of what's going on. I think if we look back over the last few years, whenever there's been a bit of a step forward, it has been when the media hasn't been covering it. So actually, I look forward to Laura Kuenssberg not tweeting about the state of the negotiations. That to me means something's happening. And right now, I think that's probably where I am with the 15th of October. Actually, I'm kind of, no news is potentially good news. I don't think we're going to get to the 15th and the famous last words. The Prime Minister's going to do an announcement on the steps of Downing Street to say that we've decided to leave with no deal. I just don't see that happening. But my personal view could be completely wrong. We'll see.
Sometimes no news is actually pretty promising news.
Yeah.
Got a couple of good comments in the chat. So Richard Hollins has signposted to an FT article looking at lawyers and accountants at risk of losing out in an EU deal. So it certainly looks like this is finally getting up the agenda in terms of impact on the PSB sector.
And I say to Richard that most people will be jumping for joy with accountants and lawyers losing out in normal parlance, but I'll have a look at that, Richard. Thank you for that.
Wolfgang's asked, is there any clarity or hint about the need for the sector to set up within the EU or needing to appoint a representative, or does that very much fall into what we've already discussed around taking a look at those individual countries?
I generally don't think we will have to be setting up branches or subsidiaries in order to trade in those organisations. I just think it's too unworkable both ways. It's just too unworkable. I think the other issue though is that the regional and national regulatory and law differences need to be considered on a case-by-case basis. Goes back to the point you made earlier, Henrietta, is map out where your clients are and where they fit in that Venn diagram.
Fantastic. So reassuring signs at least.
There's nothing reassuring.
Good, comparatively reassuring. Amy's highlighted, thank you for the really insightful comments, and also signposted to a Western Union Business Solutions and Oxford Economics paper showing a 31% increase in the value of international cross-border trade in the service sector, expected between 2019 and 2025. So, expecting to see an increase in this rather than a decrease. With that in mind, and bearing in mind that Amy's from Western Union, I wondered if you wanted to comment on the currency side of things and whether businesses who are trading with partners, whether they be in the EU or the rest of the world, may need to be considering currency and potential impacts of currency fluctuations as the future unravels over the following months.
Well, I think any organisation that's doing material business internationally is exposed to foreign exchange fluctuations and should already be considering whether it's hedging your currency risk, just mitigating exposure to currency risk. So I don't think that changes anything. I think the bigger issue is probably on a more macroeconomic point of view is let's just see what the Bank of England does over the next few months. There's lots of rumours about negative interest rates. Well, what will that mean? Will that actually mean that it's going to be easier to borrow money as a result? Discuss. And of course, I think the one thing we've avoided because we're having a Brexit conversation is what's happening next month in the United States and the status of the free trade agreement negotiations with the US, and then the impact that is clearly going to be having with our negotiations with the EU. I mean, they're all intertwined. So the whole geopolitical aspect is just huge. It's always been thus, I guess, but it just seems very particularly pointed at the moment.
Yeah, if we thought 2020 had been a big year for major international events so far, I think we've still got a few more to come before the end of the year.
You reckon there's a couple of surprises to come, yeah.
And if anyone is particularly interested in the impact of the US election, I know our Transatlantic Chamber of Commerce, part of the Greater Birmingham Chamber, are going to be holding one of their famous post-election breakfast webinars this time round to update on the results, because I think last time there was quite a surprise in terms of the result on Trump. Fantastic, thank you. So thinking back to service sector planning around Brexit, are there any areas that really stand out to you as areas where potentially the service sector could be caught out by surprise? Those bits that perhaps are flying under the radar that we shouldn't forget about?
Not specifically more than more than I've mentioned, Henrietta. I think those areas I covered, I think, are my main issues, my main concerns. Like I say, I want to be able to quickly, metaphorically, go in and deal with clients across the continent and solve their solutions. Or if I can't, be aware why I can't because of regulatory issues or professional qualifications restrictions, as that kind of exists in other jurisdictions outside of the EU. So I think that's it for me on that. Yeah.
Fantastic. So in terms of where that leaves us today, then obviously there's still a few unknowns. It looks like, as I say from the chat, that perhaps finally the potential challenges for the BPFS sector are starting to rise up the agenda. But is there anything that you'd leave our delegates with, a final piece of advice? And while you do that, if any delegates have any final questions, please do pop them in the chat, or we'll wrap up after this answer.
So look, I think if you take the view of the average number of people, the professional business services sector, just as an average, huge, but a large number of small entities are serving that sector. So therefore, they're more agile. They should be more reactive. And at the end of the day, we do what our clients want us to do. So if our clients are investing and they're a bit positive, then we're positive. And so I think it's about confidence and taking whatever happens, adapting and moving forward, and instilling hopefully instilling that confidence in the clients that we serve. But I think that's for me is just keep working on the pipeline of new projects and encouraging our clients. And I take the view that one of the problems we have in the UK is productivity. We did have pre-COVID relatively full employment with pretty low productivity levels compared to the G7 nations, and that's because we don't invest in infrastructure as much as some of our competitors in other countries. So therefore, I want to encourage manufacturing business is the easy thing is to invest and to use the professional business services sector of the UK to support you in that investment and expansion and thinking medium term, because things will come back to normal.
Fantastic. So the focusing on boosting confidence, control what you can control, and really working with your clients to look at that longer term picture, as well as the short term piece we all need to react to, prepare for, and move on through. So we have had one more question through the chat. So I don't know if you want to comment on this one in particular, but A. Hassan has asked, what do you think of JP Morgan moving out of the UK and into Europe?
I think there was always an inevitability that US bankers would be moving elements of their operations into continental Europe, but I don't know the exact number, but I think JP Morgan must be employing in excess of 10,000 people in the UK, and I think it's a rather small proportion that's gone there that's got quite a lot of media attention.
As these things, of course, do. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. Again, on behalf of the delegates, just thank you for keeping us up to date on what's happening. As you say, there are still plenty of questions that need answering, and I know yourselves with your clients and us at the Chamber will be continuing to get the latest information out to businesses and trying to do everything we can to steer us through this changeable period. Thank you all very much for joining us. As I say, we've got a series of future webinars coming up on various different topics of Brexit that you're all very welcome to join us at. And if any of you have any questions that spring to mind after today, where you would like a bit more support or you would like to ask for a bit of advice, please do reach out. You can contact your relationship manager, or if you're not a member of a chamber, we have a generic inbox, which is kbm@birmingham-chamber.com. That stands for Keep Business Moving, and we'll do what we can to help you. And if we don't know the answer ourselves, odds are we know someone that does, or we need to lobby for the government to answer it. Thank you very much again for joining us, and hope to see you on a future webinar soon.